Hello, everyone. Megan Dougherty from One Stone Creative here. And today is a special day because it is launch day of the Podcasting for Business book. This is the final installment of the show I've been recording with Tom Fox with a deep dive into the book. I hope you've been enjoying it. And I hope you're really excited to grab your copy, available today in ebook and paperback, of Podcasting for Business. It's going to make such a difference for how your podcast works within your company. It's going to save you time, it's going to save you money, and it's going to make your podcast a lot more effective. So enjoy today's episode with Tom. Grab a copy of the book if you haven't yet at podcastingforbusiness.com/book. And next week, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled broadcast with more expert interviews and details about how to podcast when it's just a part of your job. Thank you so much.
This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to an exciting new podcast entitled Podcasting for Business, the book. In this podcast, we will explore the powerful intersection of podcasting and business growth. In this exploration, I'm joined by one of the business podcast industry's top experts, Megan Dougherty, to discuss her game-changing book, Podcasting for Business. Whether you're a podcasting pro or just starting out, this podcast and Megan's book will be your go-to resource for turning your passion for podcasting into a powerful business tool. In this series, we'll take a look at the reason Megan wrote this book, the role of a podcast for a business, and why your podcast blueprint acts as your prime directive. We look at the value math of podcasts and take a deep dive into the 15 metrics Megan suggests you consider using. We look at combining blueprints and metrics moving forward for your podcast. We say some words on recording and post-production, sound and audio quality, and then putting it all together. But don't take my word for it. Listen to Megan Dougherty on why you should listen to this podcast, and more importantly, buy her book, Podcasting for Business. Megan, give me 3 reasons why a listener should read this book.
Because number 1, there actually is a formula for profitable podcasting. 2, it's all in the book, Podcasting for Business. And 3, any business can take this information and apply it and start seeing a better return on their podcasting investment.
In this, our final episode of Podcasting for Business, the book, we put it all together and give you our final thoughts on why your business needs a podcast and how it will take your business literally to the next level. I know you'll enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Megan Dougherty for another episode of Podcasting for Business, the book podcast. Welcome back, Megan.
Oh, Tom, thank you so much. And I'm so excited because at the time this releases, tomorrow is launch day. So it is a very good day today indeed.
So, Megan, I thought for that reason, we would have a podcast about sort of putting it all together. If anyone listening hasn't been convinced, let's see if we can convince them on this episode why they need a podcast for their business and how they really think about the big picture of this. So let's just start with that, and I'll ask you, and then you can pitch me that same question.
Sounds great. I think podcasting for most businesses, I won't go quite as far as I know you will and say all, but for most businesses, a podcast is going to be a really efficient way to do really important things for your business. And when you optimize it for things that your business actually needs, whether that is downloads or whether it's relationships or whether it's a better connection with your audience, your podcast is going to do that, and it's going to keep doing it over time, creating evergreen content that's going to keep serving your business forever. And so while it's a lot of work, doing it right is a lot of work. The payoffs can be huge. And I think one of the big problems that I was trying to solve by writing the book was that sometimes it's so hard to see the payoff when it seems really disconnected from the work of the podcast. But it's not. A business owner, especially one in an industry where there's a lot of high trust required, is going to get to know people through their podcast, whether it's listeners or whether it's guests or people who are just talking about an episode that they heard. It's going to make it easier for you to do business when you've got these relationships and you've got this authority. So I think the vast majority of businesses could benefit by a podcast in one way or another. What do you think, Tom?
Let me disagree with your start of your premise. Every business needs a podcast, period. And in America, 80% of all Americans know what a podcast is.
That's 240 million people. 60% of Americans have listened to a podcast. That's 180 million people. And 48%, or nearly 150 million people, listen to more than one podcast a week. This means if you're not utilizing this medium to talk about your business, you are literally missing out on the chance to reach more customers than any other medium short of advertising on the Super Bowl. And the cost is a whole lot less.
Much less
And
than
the
the Super Bowl.
format's a whole lot less. But there's something else about podcasting that I think we have touched on and I have explored at greater length, which is people trust audio more than they trust video.
Mm.
And I don't want to say podcasting puts you inside your customer's head, but guess what? Podcasting puts you inside your customer's head. Just as we are both wearing headsets, whether you use earbuds, you are hearing someone speak to you. And if you can develop a relationship with the speaker by listening to them, I consume multiple podcasts a day. And my favorite podcasters, I feel like I'm literally across the kitchen table from them, having a cup of coffee, listening to them talk. And I can tell when their voice changes. I can tell when they're excited. I can tell when they're askance. In short, I feel like I have a connection in a way that's even stronger than if I'm watching a television interview or other video form. YouTube is the largest platform, so I don't mean to say you shouldn't be on YouTube, but I find the audio format can create a trust level, not simply intimacy, but a trust level that would allow a customer, if you're in the B2C world, to have a larger amount of trust with you. And if you're in the B2B world, as the podcaster, you can have a better chance of developing a business relationship with someone through the podcast format. Those are some of the reasons. The cost effectiveness is incredible. The cost, you can start a podcast for certainly under $500. And if you learn how to do it all yourself, I admit that takes time and effort, you can create assets that you can share on social media that can be worth hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars. And that's not available to you in any other format. Yes, you can write an ad for a newspaper, a magazine, or a something, newsletter, but you're going to have to pay to put it in there unless you self-generate any of those. So a podcast format, particularly for businesses, gives you the avenues of LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook has really evolved to a lot more businesses now than individuals posting vacation pictures. So there's lots of different ways that you can reach customers literally across the United States and Canada and across the world in ways that 15 years ago didn't exist. So I think every business needs a podcast, just like every business needs a website. And if you have a podcast, you put it on your website and you have a way for people to reach out to you through your website. And it can be very powerful. I'm the number one person saying you need a podcast for your business. Now, start today. Start after you order the book and get it on the 10th. And then start. I think it's almost a no-brainer to me. It's this forum and format that brings advantages that other forms of media don't. It is unique. It's not going to take away from any other media you're using. It's going to supplement all of those. Print, newspaper, magazine, television, radio, all of that podcasting supplements. So I think it can be a great part of your overall marketing strategy going forward at a fraction of the cost of the others.
I agree with so much of that. Let me just defend my point about not every business needing one at every time. Because nothing you said is untrue. Everything you said is very true. All of those things happen. All of those benefits accrue. But what I often find when speaking to people, if someone especially has a very new business, there's too much going on to make the podcast a good focus. It's not a good time to start a podcast. Or if a business is really hurting for customers. If you need sales yesterday, the business benefits that come from podcasting are often longer term than short term. So while All of that is true. I do think for some businesses, pinning the project for 6 months, a year is going to have an ultimately better outcome to make sure that they've got the foundation for the success and they've got the time to play the long game for it.
So my response to those would be, if you're starting your business, you need to have baked a podcast into your overall business plan so it should be a part of your startup. Number one.
Fair
Number
point.
two is, you don't have any customers, you better start podcasting. So when they do start coming, you have a pipeline. You got to play the short term and the long term game. I'm just a fan.
Get the book, make your own decision.
I think, or I certainly hope, that any listener who's listening to this podcast or any of our other episodes, Megan, has just heard, or if they're watching on YouTube, seen how much fun we have doing this. So let's talk about podcasting and fun, because you rarely hear those two words in business together. So once again, I'm going to ask you the question and you can pitch it back to me.
Mhm.
But why do you find podcasting so much fun?
I find it really fun, and I'm going to preface this by saying I'm a giant nerd. And so the part of it that's really fun for me is the structures that can be built around it and the different ways that a podcast can be used. I enjoy sitting down and having conversations like with you and like with the guests that I have on my show. I look forward to those parts of my week, but like the real fun is, okay, what's the strategy for the next quarter? How are we going to podcast to get closer to this goal? Or how are we going to use the content to do this thing? And I find that kind of approach to the strategy and the management and the ongoing execution to be really satisfying. It's the kind of video game I like to play too. So that's where the fun is for me, really, is in the whole wonderful structure that is being built, along with the extra fun of getting to chat with people and getting to know people. Sometimes I had a client once who said, I don't have friends, I have a podcast. And that really resonated with me, as sometimes it's the easiest way to connect with someone when you've got this extra purpose, like having a podcast episode. So lots of places for the fun to be. What about you?
You're much more strategic than I am. And before I read this book, I had two metrics and two metrics only for successful podcasts. Number one, how much did I learn? And number two, how much fun did I have? And the first metric was based on, I know a lot about compliance. So if I learned something, probably my audience is going to learn something. But the fun part was, people can tell when a host is having fun and when they're engaged, just like you and I are in our series of podcasts together. And they say that people come for the guest and they stay for the host. I believe that. And that if your host is having fun, probably your audience is going to have fun. And they're going to want to come back and say, that was fun with Tom and Megan. Let's go listen to the next episode. And so I may have to evolve on my thinking on metrics based upon being a beta reader for this book. But I think having fun is incredibly important, incredibly useful. And you know what? If nothing else, I've had fun. So what's to lose?
You bring up something really important that I would like to talk about as we're coming to the end of this wonderful series. And that is something you said in the pre-show for this episode is, what if somebody breaks all of my rules? And someone reads the book and they look at all the stuff that I've laid out in exhaustive detail. And they're like, nope, I'm going to do it differently. And to that I say, if it's working, fantastic. It's not broken at all. The point of the book isn't to create laws for podcasting. It's not written in stone. It wasn't handed to me by a podcasting deity. They're best practices. They are things that we've seen work, things that we've reverse engineered, things that we've researched, things that we've tested. And they do work, but they're not the only things that work. And you can do something differently. You can have colleagues who are doing things differently. And if it's working and if you're satisfied with the results, then your podcast is perfect. Send me a note, come be on my podcast, be a case study, get into the new edition when we release it in a couple of years. I'd love to hear what's working for you, even if it's not what I recommend as something that would work.
I have to agree with that, having broken all the rules.
Having broken all the rules, fine.
What I will say is that reading this book and studying it in depth so I could prepare for our podcast series has really given me a very different appreciation of how to think through what a podcast is and how to talk to businesses in a business way that they're going to understand. And so I can't wait to use the book as a learning tool to try to convince businesses why they need a podcast. Once again, let me ask you to end this podcast. If our listeners wanted more information on the book, and by the time they hear this, the book will have been released, they can actually purchase the book, where will be the best place for them to go?
It's still going to be at podcastingforbusiness.com/book, and everything becomes officially live on September 10th. So if you pre-order it, it will land in your Kindle that day, or it will start hurtling through the US or Canadian postal systems to your home.
Well, Megan, I can't wait, and I look forward to figuring out the second edition.
Me too. Maybe in a couple of months.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Podcasting for Business, the book podcast. If you haven't done so, please listen to our prior 8 episodes where we lay out some of the key highlights from the book. The podcast series was great, but you really do owe it to yourself to get the book, check out the book, and use the book in your podcasting for business. Also remember the Podcasting for Business conference that Megan will put on in November. I hope I will see you there. I'll be one of the speakers. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast series. Please tell your friends about it and subscribe, rate, and review. We look forward to visiting with you again.